Sezun.
Sorry, start again.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Sara Sezun, and I'm chair of the Sierra Club Massachusetts chapter Plant-Based Planet team. We are the largest environmental organization in the country, the largest and the oldest, with 3.8 million members and supporters across all 50 states. I'm affiliated with the Massachusetts chapter, as well as chair of the Plant-Based Planet team, which I started back in 2019. And our mission is to raise awareness of the environmental effects of meat production, as well as commercial fishing, and encourage people to eat plant-based food as a way of minimizing their environmental footprint. And now, are we ready to start? Okay. Should I share screen now? Zoe, you're on mute.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe Rath. I'm from Norwell Public Library. I was just asking if everybody could put in the chat what their name and their library. It's for our stats. Thank you. And I just have to make Sarah host now.
All right. I'll start with greenhouse gases. This is a slide of the greenhouse gas emissions that are produced by animal agriculture. As we see, beef comes out.
Sarah, one thing, we can see all the slides on the right. Do you want to put it in view mode or?
View, oh, how do I do that? Okay. Let me see. Oh dear. I had to admit someone, so let me try this. I'll stop share and then start sharing again.
Okay.
And screen is loading. Okay. All right.
It's all right. No, never mind. No worries about it.
Okay. All right. First, let's start with greenhouse gases. According to the United Nations, 31% of greenhouse gases caused by humans come from agriculture, mostly carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide. Of these, 31% come directly from livestock and fish farms. This is a picture of a CAFO, or concentrated animal feed operation. It's an industry term for a huge factory farm where thousands or even tens of thousands, 10, 20, sometimes as many as 50,000 animals are all crowded together in one small space, as we see on the left. On the right, we see how the cattle live inside these CAFOs, and yes, they really are that crowded. Fish farming also contributes greenhouse gases. The picture on the left is of an ocean fish farm where the fish are all crowded together in small pens, making them susceptible to injury from fights because they'll fight with each other, as well as disease. The picture on the right is of an indoor fish farm where, in the absence of phytoplankton, their excrement collects on the bottom and decomposes without oxygen. This creates methane in the process. I would like to add about the CAFOs and the beef cattle is that cows themselves emit methane. This is because they process their food through a digestive process called enteric fermentation. And this creates methane in the process. So the average cow burps out about 100 kilograms of methane per year, which is equivalent to about 2,300 pounds of carbon dioxide. This chart shows the amount of land in the world. 29% of the Earth's surface is land. The rest is ocean. Of that, 76% is habitable. And of that, 45% is used for agriculture. And if you see the number down below it, 80% of agricultural land is used for meat, dairy, and textiles, and only 16% for crops that are directly eaten by humans. And this contributes only 17% of the world's calorie supply. The other 83% come from plant-based food, and 38% of the protein supply, with 62% coming from plant-based food. This slide shows how land is used in the United States. This big square in the middle is the amount of land in this country that is in, or shall I say, the lower 48, not counting Alaska and Hawaii, that is used for pasture, mostly for cattle, but also for sheep and goats and horses. This square to the right is the amount of land that is used for livestock feed, 127 million acres. Most of it is corn and soybeans. This rectangle above the livestock feed is 77 million acres, and that's the amount of land that is used to grow food directly eaten by humans. I would like to add that only 2% of the farmland in this country is used for fruit and vegetables. This chart shows the amount of water used to grow certain types of food. It's from a Canadian source, so that is why it is liters per kilogram of food. And it was the best chart I could find. That's why it's Canadian. But if you see, beef is on top with 1 kilogram, which is what, 2¼ pounds, requires 15,415 liters. That is the amount of water that the cow will drink, as well as the amount of water that goes into growing food for the cow. And the average cow drinks 30 to 50 gallons of water per day, which in hot weather can double to 60 to 100 gallons of water per day. Now, how much water do you drink per day? I don't even think it's a full gallon for most people, is it? But this is how much cows drink. And then we see on the bottom, to grow a kilogram of vegetables, you need only 322 liters of water. Animal agriculture produces a lot of pollution in terms of manure. Because, as it turns out, towns and cities are required to have wastewater treatment plants if they are of a certain size. Smaller towns can have septic tanks, but if a town is a certain size, by law, it has to have a wastewater treatment plant. This is not the case for factory farms. So what happens to all of this manure? It goes into water, groundwater, as well as sometimes waterways. And this is a picture of tap water from Kewaunee, Wisconsin from 2016, which it's the best picture that I could find, but it is still like this today, unfortunately. In fact, in Wisconsin, 25% of people get their water from wells, and 80,000 wells are contaminated like this. The picture on the right is of a hog farm in North Carolina after Hurricane Florence in 2018. North Carolina is the second largest hog producing state in the country, with a population of about 8 million pigs and a little over 7 million people. As you can imagine, they produce a lot of manure. And right here, this square in the center is a lagoon. It is an industry term for a huge pit lined with a thin layer of clay, the manure, and then they add some water and chemicals to help break it down. Well, as it turns out, living near one of these hog farms is not good, because frequently the stench is so bad that people can't go outside. This means they can't keep their windows open, children can't play outside, and People can't even have parties outside, or in some places they can't even hang laundry outside because it will end up smelling like pig manure. And most sadly of all, most of these hog farms are located near communities of color. The companies do this deliberately, locating the hog farms in African American, Native American, or Latino communities. This is because these are low-income communities that don't have the resources to fight them. However, they have been trying to fight, getting lawyers to work pro bono, using nonprofits, and they've been fighting this now for 30 years. And they have had some victories, but the difficulty is in getting the laws implemented because it just takes so much money and the companies have billions of dollars. They say that they can't afford to treat this waste, but the people suffer. Factory farming or meat production of any kind also has a huge impact on wildlife. In 2022, Wildlife Services of the USDA killed 384,000 native wild animals: coyotes, beavers, foxes, wolves, bears, and cougars. In most cases, this is done to protect cattle, because obviously it's easier to catch a cow than a deer. In fact, the Sierra Club had an article about this a few years ago where basically for a bear, depending on the location, it can be 1 or 2 strikes and you're out. They'll get killed by rangers because the ranchers do not want to have bears that kill cattle. And what's even scarier is that if you add in all the animals killed by other federal agencies, as well as state agencies, about 1 million wild animals are killed in this country every year, mostly to protect cattle. Plastic pollution is, of course, a serious problem, and a lot of the plastic in the ocean comes from commercial fishing. We don't know exactly how much because once it starts breaking down into small pieces, it's difficult to tell exactly where it came from. But in terms of commercial fishing, these nets are frequently the size of cathedrals. They're literally that big. And they'll frequently get damaged in the process. So crew members will often just throw them back into the ocean instead of trying to fix them. Where they continue to kill marine animals, as we see this fish got caught in one of these ghost nets and died. And here, fragments of these ghost nets will entangle animals, like this turtle over here. And this is a lot of weight for the animals to carry around, all this extra weight. This makes them weaker and more susceptible to diseases and predators. We don't know exactly how much of the ocean plastic comes from ghost nets, but we do know for one area, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. I take it most of you have heard of that. Okay, it's an area in the Pacific Ocean where there's just a huge concentration of plastic. 1.6 million square kilometers, twice the size of Texas. And 80% of the plastic in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is made up of ghost nets and other discarded fishing gear. The North Atlantic right whale lives right off the coast of Massachusetts. That is, until it's time to give birth, then females will travel to off the coast of Florida or South Carolina because their babies would otherwise die in the cold New England waters during the wintertime. It's called the right whale because back in the days of Moby Dick, this was considered the right whale to catch. It's slow moving and it's a gentle whale. It's not aggressive like a lot of other whales, so it was easy to catch for Captain Ahab and his crew. well, fictionally Captain Ahab, but other crews. They were hunted almost to extinction. Today, there are about 335 North Atlantic right whales left. Not a huge population. The most common causes of death these days are ship strikes because they're slow moving and they can't get out of the way of fast moving ships, as well as fishing gear. They get entangled in fishing gear, just like the turtle we saw above, with lobster traps being the most dangerous. As we see in this picture on the right, the whales don't see the skinny ropes linking the trap to the surface buoy. They become entangled in it. This causes severe lacerations, gangrene, and eventually death, unless the whale is lucky enough to get help. In fact, the New England Aquarium has a special program to monitor right whales, and if they see a whale in distress, they'll do their best to help it and remove the fishing gear. But unfortunately, it's not always possible. It's very difficult and sometimes just not possible to remove fishing gear if it's tangled around the whale's mouth. And with all this plastic in the ocean, fish are eating it. The fish on the left died after eating a plastic bag. And this illustration on the right shows what the stomachs of many fish look like these days because they're eating so much plastic. Zoonosis, zoonotic disease transfer, is basically diseases coming from animals and going to humans. On the left, we see a chicken factory farm, and yes, the chickens really are that crowded in together, which makes them the farm animals that are the most susceptible to diseases. Sorry about this ambulance in the background. Can everyone still hear? Can everyone hear the ambulance? Okay, it's gone. All right. But that's why they are the most susceptible of any farm animals to diseases, because they live in the most crowded conditions. The picture on the right is of a rainforest that got chopped down, and that I think is a lemur sitting on the tree stump. Whenever you chop down a forest, the animals and plants die, but the viruses do not. They just move on to other organisms, usually humans. And this picture shows the process of how it happens. These days, 3 out of 4 new diseases come from animals. Besides COVID-19, they include bird flu, mad cow disease, swine flu, AIDS, the bubonic plague, Ebola, and SARS. And yes, people do still occasionally die of the bubonic plague. And then a word about working conditions. In this country, 500,000 people work in slaughterhouses. Most are people of color, and a lot of them are immigrants, with many of them being undocumented. This is because it's difficult for companies to find people willing to work in slaughterhouses because the work is just so difficult. Working in a slaughterhouse is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Besides dealing with sharp tools, which we see here, workers have to contend with slippery floors, repetitive motion, high-speed assembly lines because the companies want to maximize profits. And then there's the emotional trauma of dealing with all this blood every single day. And if that's not bad enough, there's also the issue of child labor. The Department of Labor has found children as young as 13 working in slaughterhouses, and some states are trying to get the age, trying to make that acceptable under the law. In 2022, the Department of Labor investigated PSSI, the largest slaughterhouse cleaning company in the country. And they found 102 children working for this company between the ages of 13 and 17 in 8 different states. The Department of Labor fined PSSI the maximum amount, which was a little over $15,000 per child, that was found working there, and they paid it out. Of course, saying that the company executives said that they hadn't known that children were working, but adult workers have said that more children are working there, and who knows if we'll ever really know how many. And now let's talk about the health benefits. The China study was the largest public health study ever done. It was done back in the 1980s as a partnership between the Chinese government and Cornell University. The researchers looked at people in 130 villages throughout China. And if you see, all these dots represent the villages where they investigated. These villages were in every type of climate and geography imaginable: mountains, deserts, forests, tropics, you name it. And these were areas where people were still eating the traditional diets of their ancestors. What they discovered was that the minute meat consumption went up, so did all of the diseases. Everything from, obviously, heart disease, to diabetes, to arthritis, to dementia, to cancer. And now, what can we do? Dr. John McDougall was one of the first doctors to start studying the benefits of a plant-based diet. His wife, Mary, is the one who creates all the recipes for his books and programs. Right after medical school in the 1970s, Dr. McDougall got his first job as a physician in Hawaii. And back in the 70s, there were a lot of elderly people in Hawaii who had come from Asia in the early 20th century: Japan, China, and the Philippines. And they, for the most part, continued to eat the traditional diets of their cultures, which consisted of rice with vegetables and a little bit of meat or fish. And these grandparents were healthy for the most part, didn't get sick much. Their children, who had been born in this country, compromised. They ate some traditional Asian foods as well as some American food, and they had some health issues. The grandchildren ate the regular American diet with a lot of junk food and high-fat foods, and they were the ones who got sick the most often. So this got Dr. McDougall thinking that maybe meat and eggs and dairy products and fish were not so good after all. And he started studying the benefits of a plant-based diet. He studied all kinds of health conditions, but here let's focus on weight loss. He developed a program where you can lose weight and eat as much as you want without having to count calories. It's just that the food all has to be plant-based. And by the way, I've read one of his books, and it really does work. He talks about several cases. Dr. Neil Barnard is another one of these doctors who studies the health benefits of a plant-based diet, though he started it a few years after Dr. McDougall. And like Dr. McDougall, he has studied the benefits of a plant-based diet for all kinds of health conditions. So here, let's look at diabetes, specifically adult onset diabetes. Back in 2003, NIH, the National Institutes of Health, did a study on type 2 diabetes with Dr. Barnard's program. They found out that people eating his plant-based diet had a much better chance, much better way of controlling blood sugar. It was 3 times more effective at controlling their blood sugar than the regular diabetes diet. His special diet consists of unprocessed whole grains, legumes, fruit, and vegetables. And best of all, you don't have to restrict your food intake on this diet. I would like to say one thing, is that if you are a diabetic and you do decide to follow Dr. Barnard's diet, please do not stop taking your insulin unless your doctor says it's okay. I repeat, if you do decide to follow this diet and you're diabetic, please do not stop taking your insulin unless your doctor says it's okay. Dr. Columbus and Danette Batiste started Heart Healthy Nation, an organization that addresses health disparities in the Black community. Danette is the board chair of this organization. She's not a doctor. This is because death rates from heart disease are much higher in the Black community than they are among whites. Heart disease is the #1 killer in this country, and in 2021, 695,000 people died of it. For every 100,000 white men, according to the Centers for Disease Control in 2019, 210 white men died, and for every 100,000 Black men, 269 died, a disparity of 59. For every 100,000 white women, 129 died of heart disease, and for every 100,000 Black women, 165 died of heart disease, a disparity of 36. The most recent rates that I could find for Latinos were from 2017. For every 100,000 Latino men, 213 died of heart disease, and for every 100,000 Latina women, 130 died of heart disease. Essentially, like the other doctors, Dr. Batiste advocates a healthy plant-based diet, as well as exercise. He also places a lot of emphasis on reducing stress in your life. How do you cope with stress so that it doesn't hurt you, doesn't raise your blood pressure? And how do you make yourself happy, for lack of a better term? And then Doctors Dean and Aisha Sherzai are a husband and wife team based at Loma Linda University in California, which, by the way, is a Seventh-day Adventist school. And for those of you who are not familiar with Adventists, I should say, they advocate a healthy diet, and in fact, about 1/3 of Adventists are vegan, about 1/3 are vegetarians, and about 1/3 follow the same dietary laws as Jews. Well, the doctors Sherzai studied dementia, specifically Alzheimer's, and they have found through their research that 90% or higher of Alzheimer's cases can be prevented. How so? Well, same way. A healthy plant-based diet, exercise, sleep, which I'll admit that's my hardest one, is getting enough sleep, and then getting good mental stimulation and trying to live as happy a life as you can with good relations in your life, good relationships. I would like to add that they have found out that crossword puzzles really don't help fight dementia. The best thing is, if you want to keep your mind active to fight dementia, you should either learn how to play a musical instrument or learn a foreign language. Also, I would like to say that this book does explain their methods in detail. I've read it myself and was able to get it at my public library. So I don't know if you have it there, Zoe, but maybe. Okay. And this chart shows the cholesterol levels for 100 grams of food, with the winners being shrimp at 220, squid at 237, and eggs being the ultimate winner, 372 milligrams of cholesterol per one egg. And some of these are very surprising. If you notice, chicken actually has more cholesterol than beef. All right, now, how do you eat a healthy plant-based diet? The best thing to do is base it around whole grains, because whenever you refine grains, make them white, you're removing most of the fiber and 1/3 of the nutrients. These grains all have gluten. And I would like to mention that if you are sensitive to wheat, you may be able to eat one of the grains related to wheat: einkorn, farro, kamut, and spelt. Einkorn, I believe, originated in the Middle East. Farro was commonly eaten in ancient Rome. And in fact, it was the grain that Roman soldiers used to carry in their knapsacks as they went around conquering the world. It's also a really good substitute for rice. So you can cook up some farro if you want something different. Kamut was eaten by the ancient Egyptians, and spelt was very common in medieval Europe. I'd also like to say that these 4 grains are interchangeable pretty much in terms of flour. And if you are sensitive to wheat, you might be able to eat one of these instead. And now, these grains are all gluten-free. Amaranth was the traditional grain of the Aztecs in Mexico. Quinoa was the traditional grain of the Incas in Peru, both of them very good. Teff is a grain native to Ethiopia. And if you go to Ethiopian restaurants and you have injera, which is the nice fluffy bread that they give you, or spongy bread, I should say, that it's made out of teff flour. And sorghum is still commonly eaten in Africa and was at one point commonly eaten in the southeast of this country. Generations ago, they even used to make a syrup out of sorghum stalks. They would eat the grain and make a syrup out of the stalks that was like a substitute for maple syrup. And now, protein. How do you get protein on a plant-based diet? You have a lot of options. I personally divide beans into 2 different types: those that don't need to be soaked before cooking and those that do. These do not need to be soaked before cooking. And I would like to say something else about the myth of needing a lot of protein. According to the World Health Organization, the average adult needs only about 56 grams of protein per day. But most people in this country get 100 grams. And more is not better, because it's just going to be difficult for your kidneys to process all this extra protein, and it can lead to gout or kidney stones. Or if nothing else, it will just be stored as fat. And now I'd like to mention these 2, which I think people may be less familiar with. These beans, the red ones, are aduki beans, and they're common in Chinese and Japanese cooking. And if you've ever had mochi pastries, which are delicious Japanese pastries made out of rice, and what they do is sometimes mash up aduki beans and use them as a cream filling, which is very good. And then there are mung beans, which are common in Chinese, Japanese, and Indian cooking. These beans do need to be soaked before being cooked, unless you're using an Instapot or maybe a pressure cooker. The average time to soak beans is 8 hours or overnight. If not, they'll take forever to cook, and I know because I found that out the hard way. Chickpeas, however, need to be soaked 12 hours. If not, they'll take forever to cook, and this is because they're just so hard. Another word about beans is that you should not add salt to them until maybe the last 5 to 10 minutes of cooking, because otherwise they just won't get tender. You should wait until you can pierce them with a fork without too much effort, and that's when you add the salt. The only exception is for lima beans, because they have very thin skins. And if you are cooking lima beans, then you should add the salt right at the beginning. Sorry about that. And now, soy products. Has everyone had miso soup? Okay, it's great. You get it in Japanese restaurants and it's delicious. Miso is basically fermented soybeans, similar to the process for making pickles. Delicious, has a lot of beneficial enzymes, and may be helpful in preventing radiation sickness. So if someone is getting radiation treatment, giving them miso soup may help their condition. It's just that it has to be organic miso to make sure that it has all the enzymes. And for the other three, soy products, I would like to mention a concept from Chinese medicine, or Japanese too, traditional medicine, which is that every food has a thermal nature, warming, neutral, or cooling. For instance, ginger and garlic are very warming, obviously. Watermelon is very cooling, and turnips are neutral. Well, as it turns out, soybeans are very cooling, according to Chinese medicine, meaning you're not supposed to eat them raw. So for soy milk, if you are going to be using it in a sauce or for baking, or you can replace it one-on-one with milk. Say 1 cup of soy milk can substitute 1 cup of dairy milk. However, if you're going to be drinking it or making a smoothie or using it for cereal, it's recommended that you mix it with water, 50-50. Otherwise, you're just going to feel bloated, get a stomach ache, and it's not going to feel very good. And then tempeh, which is this substance here in the right-hand corner, originated in Indonesia. And it's a really great substitute for chicken dishes because it has a nice texture to it. What they do is they cook the soybeans and then add special bacteria so that they're processed and they'll all stick together in this block. However, if you are going to be cooking tempeh, you should never use it raw. You should cook it for at least 20 minutes because you do have to kill the bacteria. It's not fatal. You're not going to die if you eat tempeh that's undercooked. It's just not going to taste very good and you're not going to feel very good. As for tofu, it's very cooling, so I recommend that you cook it for at least 10 minutes. Even if it is for something like a pudding or frosting that you're going to use, you can make frosting with tofu or cream cheese with tofu. I would steam it for 10 minutes before you throw it into the blender with all the other ingredients. That way it's easier to digest and it will taste better. Finally, I would like to talk about beverages. The healthiest beverage ultimately is water, filtered if possible, because it's the best at cleansing your body, removing any impurities that you have, any contaminants. It's also the best at hydrating your body. There's a lot of talk from the wine industry about the health benefits of a glass of wine. Well, guess what? It doesn't come directly from the wine itself so much as from resveratrol, which is a substance found in red grapes that prevents inflammation. And you're much better off getting this from grape juice or by eating the grapes, because alcohol is not good for you. First, it can lead to weight gain. It has 7 calories per gram, almost as much as fat. It's a toxin, and your body tries to remove it as quickly as possible. Because if you think about it, you'd use rubbing alcohol to disinfect. So yes, I know rubbing alcohol is different. It's something you can't consume anyway, but is that really something you want in your body? And it's a depressant. Plus, it can increase the risk for dementia, may increase the risk for cancer, and can lead to liver, heart, and kidney failure. So, be skeptical or just don't believe the wine industry. And now, I do want to mention before I go on to the next slide, I couldn't find a good slide of this that was not basically a commercial for some brand, and being a nonprofit, we can't publicize brands. But one vitamin that I definitely recommend as a supplement is B12, because people who eat a plant-based diet often don't get enough of it. But then again, even meat eaters don't get enough of it. It's true, you can get B12 from animal foods, but you're better off just getting it as a supplement because you want to avoid all the other things, the fat and cholesterol and what have you from animal foods that we've talked about. Actually, your body's intestinal flora should be able to manufacture enough B12 for you. The problem is, though, these days that we have so many toxins in the environment that most people can't do it. So you are better off taking a supplement. I myself do that every day. And then there's vitamin D3, which you can get from sunlight, but because we live in a cold climate and people stay indoors a lot, most of us don't get enough of it. So you are better off taking a supplement. Not to mention, if you do spend too much time outside in the sun, you could get sunburn, and then that's not good. And now, these are some meat substitutes and things you can use to substitute for them. And yes, you really can make pork substitutes out of carrots. There are plenty of recipes on the web for that. And then egg substitutes. I'd like to draw your attention to one of these, flax seeds. If you are baking a cake or cupcakes or muffins or a quick bread, what you can do to replace the eggs is take a tablespoon of flax seeds, throw them into the blender and grind them up until they're a coarse meal. Then add 3 tablespoons of water, preferably cold, and grind them up until they're all nice and gummy. And then I usually let it sit about 5 minutes, and you can use that to replace 1 egg. It really works. I've done it many times. What's more, it keeps your baked goods nice and moist longer than baking with eggs will. And finally, here are some dairy substitutes. And I'd like to add here that you can buy commercial plant-based butter as a butter substitute, but depending on the recipe, you can often just use a cup of vegetable oil. I would say sunflower or safflower because they have neutral tastes. And depending on what you're baking, like say most cakes or muffins or quick breads, that will do the job just as well. Okay, and now that's the end of my presentation. So are there any questions?